Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock, and I think we'd like to start. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome everyone here today for the 10th Judson Randolph Endowed Fellowship Lecture and Fellow Installation Ceremony. The Judson Fellowship was established in 2002, and the lectureship in pediatric surgery honors Dr. Randolph's outstanding contributions and leadership in surgical innovation, as well as education, and most importantly, the care he gave to children at our institution. During his 28-year career at Children's National, Dr. Randolph created one of the most rigorous and prestigious surgical training programs in the world. And he really laid out the base for our current surgeons who are practicing at Children's here today. I would like to ask the surgeons in the crowd, I don't see too many of them here yet, to stand up and be acknowledged. These surgeons are really the future of pediatric surgery at Children's and also in America. An endowed fellowship is a rare and important gift to any institution, and specifically ours. It allows us to continue to recruit and train the best and brightest surgical trainees and residents, and many generous people have contributed to this, and for this we are very thankful to those individuals. At the conclusion of the lecture today, we will officially install this year's Randolph Fellow, is Dr. Mark Slidell. But prior to that, we have a great opportunity today to hearing from an exceptional thought leader in pediatric surgery, Dr. Peter Kim. Dr. Kim came to us from Toronto, Canada, from the Hospital Sick Children. He is now our Vice President of the Sheikh Zayed Institute. He is also an Associate Surgeon-in-Chief and also co-leads the Institute's Systems Biology Initiative. Dr. Kim implements the Institute's innovative vision and multidisciplinary approach to research and development in pediatric surgery. Dr. Kim's research focuses on the development of smarter surgical tools, including image guidance and robotics, as well as simulation technologies, and will prepare future pediatric surgeons with a more hands-on approach. While Peter was in Toronto, he raised over $60 million to establish an image-guided therapeutic facility. And I joke with Peter that that was just his training for the eventual job at Children's National Medical Center. He has authored more than 100 papers on a range of topics with special emphasis on developmental molecular biology, as well as innovation and technology and minimally invasive surgical techniques. For those of you who don't know, Peter and I were running mates. He was a senior fellow and I was the junior fellow at the Hospital Sick Children in Toronto. And I'm sure most of you do know that the rigors of a surgical fellowship and training, which is different to today, Dr. Slidell, were very, very intense. Just kidding. Were very intense, very stressful, and it really was conducive to either a love or hate relationship between the fellows. I'm pleased to tell you that in Peter and my case, it was love at first sight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Kim, who will provide our lecture this morning entitled Reimagining Surgery for the Future, Cyber Sapien as Future Surgeon. Thank you.
Morning. Can you hear me well? Thank you very much for that kind and generous introduction. We had a wonderful evening last night in the share of fellowship in the presence of Dr. Randolph and community that supports the fellowship, his vision and a legacy. It was truly a privilege and a humbling experience for me. Um, Today, rather than sort of talking about specifics of research or specific aspects of research, I thought I would choose a fairly broad topic and use that as an opportunity to think together about some of the issues that we as surgeons face today and as we move into the future. Can you not hear me well? Nope. Can you, is it possible to raise the volume of it? Is that better? Nope. Maybe I'll hold on to it. What I do? Okay, that's good. Is it? Can you hear me better? It is true that, according to Sir Isaac Newton, that if I've seen any further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And where we stand today, we can see more clearly where we go, and we can see further because we are standing on the shoulders of giants, such as Dr. Randolph. You can see the list of illustrious luminaries in pediatric surgery who have spoken to you before, and it's really a privilege and honor for me to stand here before you today. Today I'm going to touch briefly on the issue of technology as a whole, about the reimagining the future aspects of surgery, and more specifically, evolving role of surgeons in all these care, education, and research. When you look at history of Earth and history of mankind, we as a species have really not been here very long. Our footprint is extremely small. And yet we have been extremely successful and dominant as species. And what made us successful and dominant is our ability to communicate and to adapt. And when a survey was taken not too long ago by business leaders, that some of the things that dominate what we consider to be life-altering technologies over the last 30, 40 years, at least 7 out of 10 top things is that better? So 7 out of 10 things that what we would consider life-altering events have to do with the technologies that would enable us to communicate better. And interestingly enough, that 3 out of 10 contain something about that would enable us to look into medical information about us, such as genetics, MR technology, and then as well as minimally invasive. Having said that, Francis Fukuyama, who's a political philosopher, who's published a book not too long ago called Our Post-Human Future. And he talks about the impact of biotechnology and its potential impact on mankind and species in general. And he concludes by quoting, and I quote, "Today there walks upon our planet a species that is so powerful that it can control its own evolution at its own time and choosing. Homo sapien, what new species shall we choose to become?" And not too long after that, obviously, Craig Venter and his group from genomics have created a really new synthetic species, a man-made species. But the real question is, are we really that powerful? Has technology made us so powerful? When you look at Alvin Toffler's observation about the societal changes, it's that some of the changes that has taken place really hasn't been such a long period. We moved from hunter-gatherer to agrarian agricultural society, and more recently, over the last couple of hundred years, into an industrial age where the massive production and mechanization really changed how we live, and more recently in information age where things are digitalized. But when you look at the sort of these waves of changes in our society and how we live, what's fundamentally changed or what's interjected is technology that interface our everyday lives and how we handle the amount of information that's given to us. Rick Sataba, who's well known to people in technology, speculate that in the future, this information will eventually be fused into our if you will, genomic or DNA, so that the future wave will be something to do with fusion and hybridization between human and machine. Having said that, when you look at surgery as a discipline or craft, we really have or haven't changed very much. When you look at the modern evolution of the surgery, there are essentially 3 or so seminal events. Surgery, by definition, is a handwork. And when you look at the quotation about 2,500 years ago, is the first and the highest division of the healing art, pure in itself, perpetual in its applicability, a working product of heaven and surely of fame on earth. But the theatrics of it, the craft and the art of surgery, I think we still take that sort of in a literal form. Type of things that made surgery possible in modern era have to do with the introduction of antisepsis by Joseph Lister and Louis Pasteur, introduction of ether and chloroform, and subsequent generation of anesthetic agents in mid-1900s, and more recently introduction of a minimally invasive paradigm. The introduction of minimally invasive paradigm really fundamentally shifted how we view surgery in the context, not only trying to do no harm, but at the same time our prime directive is evolving into try to avoid any type of collateral damage. This paradigm, from a disease-focused type of looking at sort of a disease as an antagonistic aspect, to more healthcare as in more preventative, prophylactic, and proactive type of approach, is really changing how we see the surgery as a profession, and as well as how we apply the technology and future role of surgeons. But having said that, we have a number of challenges. When you look at the actual tool design or type of instruments that we use in surgery, this really have not evolved beyond the industrial age paradigm. From Roman era to medieval to Victorian to more recent types of tools, these are variations of basic mechanics of human motion and ergonomics. However, having said that, beyond that design aspect to it, the actual scale of tools that will be coming down the road are evolving ever smaller and smaller. We're going from macro to meso to mini to micro to and eventually nano. There's only so many hands you can use to actually use types of tools that are nano in scale. So the way in which surgeons have to think about their evolving role will have to be fundamentally changed. What this has created is what we call sort of a cognitive dissonance, if you will. That as we get older, our mind thinks that we can do a lot of things, but obviously our body cannot. And similar to that, as in even though our surgical paradigm still resides within very mechanical paradigm based on evolution, the type of technology that's coming down the road have really nothing to do with the human mechanics, if you will. So that dissonance, that gap, needs to be closed at some point. Additional challenge we have in surgical discipline is that surgeons as a group tend to be conservative, surprisingly conservative for people who do very risky things. We say that in the context of patient safety and access and so on, But when you look at a curve of adaptation, people like Stephen Jobs, people who innovate, they are what you call sort of at the very tail end, 3.5% of the population. And there are early adopters who line up 4 o'clock in the morning to get to the latest gadgets. When you look at this tipping point, this is about 15% of population. But surgeons as a whole tend to be at the bottom 20% or so. Many of us use digital phone because we can't really get analog telephone. Less than 4% of our surgical literature is really randomized study. My old teacher used to tell me that when he goes to a meeting and when he hears about the facts and truth, he says, don't confuse my mind with facts. My mind's made up. So in that way, surgeons as a whole tend to be somewhat on a conservative side. This conservative, if you will, culture of flexibility or lack of flexibility is essentially swimming against culture of, if you will, flexibility or fluidity in the open ocean of internet and Dr. Google. I'm sure in your practice every day, a patient comes with a stack of information saying that Dr. Sandler does this in Washington, D.C., why don't you? Dr. Peters does robotic surgery in D.C. Children's, why don't you, if you will? So this is really flattened the way in which medical information is exchanged and transmitted. It used to be top down from provider to patient, but I think it's more and more increasingly bilateral. And the way in which we adjust our practice needs to be changed in that context. The other interesting thing is that in addition to design issues and size issues and the amount of information that we have to manage as surgeons is more to do with workflow. Even in my time, and I don't think this is too different now that we see and technology and many of things that helps us to carry out surgical practice in a serial way, one at a time. But as technology gets more and more integrated into an interface between how we provide care, you'll note that that serial mechanism is not going to work anymore. It has to be done in a parallel fashion. The type of multitasking, we are really reaching the limits as to how much we can handle. And is there a threshold, or if you will, a limit in which we are able to handle that sort of information and use it effectively and use it efficiently for patient care? The answer is not necessarily coming up with a pill that makes you think faster or handle all that information much quicker, nor is it in recreating evolution in terms of mechanics of it, because it really had millions of years of advantage, if you will. But it's really, the key really is in looking at the design and see how it would expand human capacity and capability. This is Oscar Pistorius, who recently created quite a bit of controversy because he was born with a tibial agenesis and he's always used the prosthetics. The challenge was that because he was running faster than many normal people using his prosthetics, the question arose as to whether or not this design of that prosthetics, which looks very different than a human lower leg, gives an added advantage. But this is the fundamentally kind of a design issue, if you will, that will enable us, empower us to really take us to the next level in terms of distilling that sort of sea of information we have and using that in a manner that would expand our capacity and capability. And this is true as we move into the future, essentially almost life imitating art, as in many of the things that we use these days. You will note that you probably have seen it in Star Trek, whether it be phone or what have you. And that is so true as in type of information has evolved from Homo sapien to Techno sapien to, if you will, cyber, as in the key in that success, in that chain of evolution, is really being able to use that converting that knowledge into a wisdom and picking out what works for human beings in terms of expanding our capacity and capability. And that sort of a transformation is already taking place at Children's National in the form of Sheikh Zayed Institute, if you will. It is true that type of the activities that we have done collectively, such as curiosity-based and hypothesis-driven, those are very important in terms of understanding the knowledge of our species and systems and expanding understanding of human behavior and behaviors of the nature. But on the other hand, in order for us to be able to use that knowledge in an intelligent and relevant way, that translation has to take place. And the type of experiment, if you will, we have at Sheikh Zayed is exactly the type of venue with which we can really translate those types of endeavor. This is version 1.0, and it has evolved already within last year or so. Sheikh Zayed experiment, if you will, is over a 5-year time frame, the initiative. First year was to design, middle 3 years to really to produce, and the last year is to renew, if you will, if you divide the sort of whole initiative into 3 phases. We started with the 4 initiatives in pain, systems biology, cancer immunology, and bioengineering. Now we've added education and innovation into that portfolio, and then there are a number of leaders that are expanding our boundaries of our knowledge. I mean, I can go on specifically talk about each one of them in next hour or so, but today I'm just going to focus a little bit on the bioengineering part as to where this is going to lead us. This initiative is led by Kevin Cleary and Ray Z, and with the participation from Tim Kaine and Craig Peters. When you look at the surgical tool development, as you've heard recently that we have acquired Da Vinci Robotics, and that Craig Peters has performed our first robotic surgery in our institution here. But when you look at the next generation of tools that are coming down the road, again, the tool sets are somewhat more and more miniaturized, and it is smarter in a sense that the types of sort of functionalities that would do is essentially to minimize any type of collateral injury that it would cause. So for instance, there's a big trend towards what we call natural orifice. In other words, trying to do surgery through a natural orifice, such as through mouth, through nose, through any type of natural orifice that we have. Obviously, tool sets that would go into those cavities will be smaller, more flexible, and it would have a very different types of functionality that would require that. This type of a single port, in other words, trying to do entire operation through a one access point, through either a belly button or any other, that is already being done, and then Tim Kaine and others are leaders in that aspect as well. But the eventually type of research that Kevin Cleary and others are doing is to essentially fuse this. So the type of tool sets that we'll have will be combination of both the flexible and then as well as not only through the natural orifice, but combined through a single port. But as we move forward, the tools that we will have will be self-assembling, almost autonomous type of a component. In other words, you can put components of robotic tools and that will self-assemble within the cavity, and they will have functionalities at the end that can be virtually controlled, if you will. And these are the sort of types of technology that are coming down the pipe. Many of the tool sets will be catheter-based, as in they will be extended at the end of a catheter device, so that the type of collateral injury that we as a surgeons cause today will be completely minimized or mitigated completely. And the other thing that we are working and coming down the road is essentially translate that industrial age paradigm into a next information age paradigm. That is to automate some parts of surgery from diagnostic to therapeutics. Many of the x-rays today are digitalized. And then fundamentally, when you look at radiology or pathology, it's essentially looking for signal in the sea of background. So that paradigm has been tried in some context, but as we move down, this type of sort of automation in diagnosis and linking that to automated therapeutics, it's not too far off in terms of finding a early clinical applicability. I briefly shared this with you last night at the dinner. One of the technologies that we will be installing here and sometime in January or February of early next year is a technology called high-intensity focused ultrasound. And this is led by Kurt Newman and with a significant support from Roger Packer and Dave Wessel. And essentially, this is to create an MR-OR environment in a neurosurgical suite that combines spectroscopy and the HIFU. What it does is essentially changing that invasive to minimal invasive to essentially a non-invasive by using ultrasound types of energy as a treatment tool. Combination of technologies that we will be installing in that suite will be first of its kind in the world, and type of experiments that will be led by Bob Keating, Tony Sandler, Jeffrey Dome, Ray Z, and as well as Audrey Duplessis and Catherine Lambropoulos will be first of its kind. And this is in close collaboration with thought leaders in NIH, such as Brad Wood, for instance. But more important than what Sheikh Zayed has created is essentially an ecosystem. It's a community of innovation where all different types of, initially with the surgical specialties, but I'm hoping that the entire organization will participate, because way in which we think about how to make improvements and difference. In other words, looking for that a contextual meaning that is in the background of a lot of information we have, what it is that creates the value. I'm hoping that this type of sort of a culture of innovation will permeate throughout the organization from every parts of the hospital. I want to change it sort of a gear a little bit and touch upon educational aspect at the end, because this is an important element of what Dr. Randolph has created. It's important because this is essentially how our knowledge will be archived and transmitted to next generation. Every 100 years or so, there's usually a white paper on medical educational reform. And the most recent one came out in Lancet last year with a consensus among deans of medical schools across the world. And fundamentally, what he sort of stipulated is that medical education has changed from art form to science-based in early 1900s to more recently in problem-solving or problem-solving based. And then as we move towards into the future, it will be gradually becoming more and more competency-based. The education is not simply to be informative in terms of transmitting knowledge and skill, but formative in terms of creating a value for people who are giving education, but at the same time people who are receiving it. But fundamentally, to be really out in forefront is to be transformative in by creating leaders of the future so that they would continually create not only the knowledge, value, but at the same time future leaders on their own. And part of that sort of paradigm requires a slightly different way of thinking about how we contain education and knowledge and then transmit it to the next generation. Now, this is a world mapper that was published in Lancet. When you look at it, it is a concepts in geographically represented, if you will. World's population burden is mostly in Asian countries, particularly India and China, if you will. The burden of disease mostly is in Africa and sub-Saharan area. The plentitude, if you will, the amount of medical knowledge in terms of numbers, most numbers of doctors are in Europe and North America. And then most numbers of medical schools are in Africa. So how do you reconcile that disparity, if you will? This is on a sort of a global scale, because we will be hitting 7 billion people probably within the next 10 or 15 years. On a big scale, we have to think about how this sort of global issue can be reconciled, if you will. And this is on a much micro scale. And this is an example of number of cases that are being done in pediatric surgical group by Children's Hospital in Toronto. Sick Kids covers about 6.5 million people for primary, secondary, and tertiary care, and about 13 million people for quaternary care. There are 7 surgeons in that group, and when you look at the what we call index cases to train in 2-year time frame, we're looking at about 400 or 500 cases per year in a reasonably sized program. When you divide this into number of surgeons, you are essentially reducing it down to 50 or 60 cases per surgeon. What is the minimum number of cases that you need in terms of maintaining your competence and performance, and at the same time being able to transmit it, contain it, and transmit it to not only to your colleagues, but to next generation? It is not simply enough that Dr. Sandler does world's most amazing operation in this institution. But if that knowledge is simply contained within this institution, that is really not a very good knowledge, if you will. So in order to sort of reconcile that, if you will, dissonance or disparity, part of the solution may be in way in which we handle information or in digitalization. I'm sure you have seen this YouTube video, and it's very telling. It's about a little over a minute. And this is clearly documented by Sir Aradarzi from Imperial College when he digitalized, if you will, motions of beginners to novice to expert surgeon. In other words, you can capture, when you talk about education or training or procedural aspect, in a digital format. And by creating not only the hardware and software, but creating haptics into it, you can essentially capture what Dr. Sandler does in such a perfect way, if you will, in a digital format, so that can be replicated in a perpetual manner. And that really is, I think, one of the solutions for not only in terms of dealing with the macro issues in terms of volume outcome in pediatric surgery or maintaining competence and performance, but at the same time thinking about how to close the gap of that disparity between burden of population, burden of disease, and burden of way in which we meet that disparity. And then what's made it possible, the thinking about how sort of digital means can cross that gap, is very similar. Again, life imitating art. James Cameron's Avatar has really revolutionized in terms of looking at animation and graphics into its application in medical education, for instance. Types of simulation is a standard in aviation industry. Many pilots these days fly without having ever flown in a real airplane. And I see that in my lifetime, some of my competence and performance will be maintained and certified through digital means. And the technology that would support that, I think that will come within my lifetime as well. And I say that is because we are already developing a couple of simulation tools that are based on NASA technology in combining with industry partners that will help us to develop it, and that are real life-like simulation in real time. And the other thing is that in our institution here, led by Dr. Randy Bird, the simulation environment, and he's created this in a trauma bay, that where we investigate clearly in terms of workflow and how we handle it, sort of multitude of information, particularly in the setting of, for instance, trauma. And those are really sort of the combining not only the tool sets that's required to learn the basics of competence and performance, but how to incorporate that sort of a information overload into a workflow situation. So having said that, I close with the quote by Albert Bogman, and then it's quite to me it's very telling. As in, technology promises to relieve us of the burden of being merely human, of being finite creatures in harsh and unyielding in world. The technology is most celebrated when it is most invisible, when the machinery is completely hidden, combining godlike effortlessness with a blissful ignorance about the mechanisms that delivers our disburdened lives. And I think that really captures how technology should be used. But as we sort of transform from current state to techno to cyber sapient, the key is not only knowing tomatoes are fruits, but really having to develop that wisdom to not to put tomatoes in fruit salad. I think that's an important element of the whole message. Again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. It's a forum for me to somewhat confabulate about some of the ideas that I have. It's more of a reflection and introspection, but I'm grateful for this opportunity, and obviously pioneers like Dr. Randolph, who's paved before me for this type of opportunity to happen. Thank you very much.
We won't have a question session. Luckily, today's speaker is one of our homegrown, so he'll be here and he's accessible any time of the day and night, whenever you want to get him. So please approach him afterwards if you have ideas, thoughts. It's been a real treat listening to Peter's reflections or intuition about where the Sheikh Zayed Institute is going to go, where it's going to take us, and how it's going to lead technology in surgery in this country. If we could please have Dr. Mark Batshaw to come up, please.
Peter, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the futuristic and very thoughtful and exciting lecture that you presented. And I'd like to present you with this little plaque that says Peter C.W. Kim presenting at the 10th annual celebration of the Judson G. Randolph Fellowship in Pediatric Surgery. So thank you very much. I also wanted to say just a word about the importance of philanthropy in all of this, and to recognize Pam King-Sams. Is Pam here? And all of her group, which really made not only this possible for the Judson Randolph Endowed Lectureship, but the whole Sheikh Zayed Institute, which was the conception of our CEO, Kurt Newman, was brought to fruition through his insights, through Pam and her group's work, and through the recruitment of Peter Kim, and through Kurt's success in bringing this astonishing, wonderful person to us. So thank you, Pam. Thank you, Kurt, for all you've done.
Thank you, Mark. Today we honor the legacy of Dr. Randolph. who really has laid the foundation for pediatric surgical training here at Children's National Medical Center. Unfortunately, Dr. Randolph is not here this morning. He was with us last night, and it was a real pleasure spending some time with him. Today, we are reaffirming the commitment and the importance of investing in the future of pediatric surgery by installing Dr. Mark Slidell as a 10th Judson G. Randolph Fellow in Pediatric Surgery. Again, we want to thank the donors for this endowment and their contributions to the life and work of Children's National Medical Center. Celebrating moments like these, times like these, is really important, not only for now, but for generations to come. I would like Dr. Tim Kane, our program director in pediatric surgery, to please come up and join me on the stage, and perhaps Tim can give the fellowship to Dr. Slidell.
Well, we're very honored to install the next Judson Randolph Fellow, the 10th Fellow, Mark Slidell. I'm sorry I wasn't there last night. I was doing one of those single incision surgeries, so I missed Dr. Randolph. And as you look upstairs on the wall with all these pictures of all the fellows that over the years, I'm thinking about where we're going to go with the next row because we're kind of running out of room. But it's an esteemed group of trainees, and I'm really proud to be able to have some part in training these fellows. Sometimes they even go on to be CEOs of the hospital. So I think Mark comes to us as a local guy, although he was born in Montreal, went to Connecticut College, did his medical school at Brown University, and trained right here in D.C. at Georgetown University. So I'll have Mark come up. I'm sure all of you know him. He's an outstanding individual, and he'll be here for another several months so we can get to know him better. Sorry.
I'd just like to thank the institution, the foundation, and all the faculty here at Children's National for the honor of being installed as the 10th Randolph Fellow. It was a pleasure to see Dr. Randolph last night. I had the chance to thank him myself for starting the fellowship here. I'd also like to thank all those who supported the endowment over all of these years. It's truly an honor and a privilege to work here at Children's.
Congratulations, Mark. With young surgeons like yourself, like Dr. Slidell, I have great confidence in the future of pediatric surgery. I just remember yesterday morning, you and I were doing a procedure together in a little child with a congenital pulmonary adenomatoid malformation, removing part of the lung. And you come to that realization how lucky we are as faculty to be able to work with surgeons like the fellows that we can attract to Children's. And that's thanks to our prior leaders, of course, Dr. Randolph and Dr. Newman. Dr. Kim, thanks again for your wonderful talk. It was inspiring. It sets the bar very high for where we're going to see our center in the next 5 years.